Welcome everyone in the room and also over at Zoom. Today we're very happy to have Jill and hopefully she will motivate us a little bit. We need it right now so much. Thank you for coming.
Wonderful. Okay, this is going to solve all your problems, this webinar. Probably not, but at least we can talk about motivation and see where we're at, do like a check-in for ourselves and then for others, and learn a little bit about how we can maybe give it a boost if we're feeling like we need it. So, um, so motivation. When I was putting this presentation together, I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about and what is like important to convey. And for a moment, I thought it was actually quite difficult to describe what is motivation because it's often just like a feeling that we have within us. And like to describe it, it's like, an energy, it's a feeling, it's like desire for like something bigger than ourselves often as well. But like putting it into words is something a little bit tough. So I put together a couple definitions that like spoke to me as I was, researching the topic a little more deeply. And one that I really liked was the energizing pursuit or the energizing behavior in pursuit of a goal. And then tapping into those things that are not just like the behavior, but the feeling side of it as well, that it's about that feeling that initiates and guides us and maintains that goal-oriented behavior. Because I think probably all of us, can understand and have experience with motivation being high when we're getting started with something, but then like that persistence piece is what makes it really challenging over time. So in my cartoon here, we can kind of probably all think back to those moments that we've had where motivation has gone up and down, and we know that it's never linear. And it's often really easy to give up in those moments where we're feeling like it's low, especially if it's been low for a while. But we'll talk about some strategies to be able to help give it a boost when it needs it. So there's two types of motivation. There's intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And intrinsic is that force that comes from within. It's often more kind of that feeling of the feeling that we describe with motivation, having kind of like a greater purpose to what the goal is, that it's tied to satisfaction, that we feel like we get energy out of it, that it matters to us. And is often that something that just like it just flows, it just happens. It's not necessarily about seeing like steps along the way. It's something that we have. Whereas extrinsic motivation is more influenced by external factors. So things that are reward based. So maybe like recognition or money, a salary, progressing through your degree or your career pathway. Or it can also be about avoiding punishment. And, punishment is kind of a legacy of the work from classical conditioning. So you don't necessarily have to think about it as such so strongly, but it can be like punishment can be like a wide range of different things. It can just mean consequence. And there's three components to motivation. There's the activation of it, then there's the intensity of it, and then there's the persistence. So we have two that are kind of temporal, and then one that is about like that energy that goes with it, the intensity of it. So some of the things that we know about motivation come from DC and Ryan's research, and we know that there are three main components to intrinsic motivation and what boosts it and drives it. And they created self-determination theory out of this, which tells us that we need autonomy, that feeling that you have choice and control in what you're doing and your actions and your decisions, and competence. So the desire to master skills, to overcome challenges and see progress, that's really tied to that persistence piece. And then relatedness, which is something that is less discussed when it comes to motivation. So things that are much more like behavioral, but within a community setting. So feeling connected, feeling cared for, feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself. So there are some key drivers that also influence this. And we know that those are things like curiosity, the challenge being at the right level, having like ascribed meaning and purpose to what that motivation gives us out of the task. that there's fun and enjoyment and like engagement to what you're doing with it and mastery. And we need all of those things, not just one or the other, or different things in different levels, because we're going to like encounter all kinds of challenges as we like progress through any kind of task. And one alone is not enough to be able to carry us through those more difficult moments. So what's noted as across research is that extrinsic motivations generally are less lasting than intrinsic ones, that feeling of like higher purpose and like seeing yourself develop, the joy of what work is. Work for work's sake is not necessarily joyful. You have to have something that keeps you going, because not all aspects of it are going to be enjoyable all the time. But it's important to have both, because often we also think that intrinsic motivation is like much more superior, that extrinsic motivation means that you don't necessarily have good alignment with what your goal is on a personal level. That's not necessarily true. And extrinsic motivators have a time and place where they're helpful as well. So some key factors that affect intrinsic or extrinsic motivation are about those rewards and the absence of punishment. So rewards often are things that like help give us a pick-me-up when we need it. And the absence of punishment, when it comes to classical conditioning, is like avoiding consequences, and both can be motivating depending on the circumstance. So if we think about rewards, those can be things that are like tangible. It can be like seeing a salary increase, getting that bonus, like being recognized in your position, but there are also intangible rewards as well, that are things like praise, feeling like you're part of a community, that you've been recognized for your efforts, getting good feedback. But we can also see that like avoidance of consequences, when we think about, all of us have gone through so many exams throughout our career and educational trajectories. Knowing that you have testing coming can be quite motivating, but we know that that's not enough to be able to motivate somebody in the long term, especially when we see that there are consequences that don't necessarily impede our ability to keep moving forward. So a good example of this is smoking. So the packages, I'm Canadian, and the packages within Canada have had for a very long time warning labels on them. As time went on, they became more and more graphic as well, to say, this is a picture of what you can expect your lungs to look like, or mouth sores and things to develop into. But that's not an effective strategy for people to overcome like a smoking habit. That punishment becomes more and more like irrelevant emotionally to people over time, because you become conditioned to seeing that a consequence is not happening, at least within the immediate term. So this is where timing is also really important, because the timing of rewards and consequences really affect motivation as well. So it's found that rewards are more effective when they are either immediate or they are unexpected. But if there are consequences that are immediate or powerful, or those have more of an effect than consequences where they are delayed, especially very long-term delayed. It's also important for the task that you're doing to have, like if it's something that is mundane and routine, rewards can also be quite effective for helping people persist through to finish whatever that task is. So some demotivators, I'm sure we can also like look within ourselves and think of moments in particular when you have had something like really sway you off course. We'll talk about those within the reflection as well. But within the workplace, we can think of some of those things being like having, being micromanaged, so you don't have all that much control or like authority to be able to conduct the work that you want in the ways that you want as well. Sometimes there's room for that, sometimes there isn't. Of course, protocols need to be done in the ways that they need to be done. But for things where there's more scope for that, micromanagement is a major demotivator. Lack of recognition and poor leadership are also factors that can demotivate employees, especially long term. Seeing underpayment or a lack of growth opportunities tap into that feeling of the intrinsic motivations. If you can't see where you're going, it's much harder to be able to motivate yourself to continue through your work. Unclear goals are also about that work alignment. So if you're unsure what the outcome is supposed to be, or you don't know what success is supposed to look like, that can be demotivating. And then, of course, things like burnout, the organizational culture that you're in, overwork, the expectations of workload and the conditions that you're expected to perform those under can also be demotivating. And then conversely, all of these different things, you can see the flip side of it being very true of being motivating as well, that these things help people persist. So within education settings, the teacher behavior, the class characteristics, failure experiences, we'll talk about more, and the environment all can create demotivating experiences for people as well, especially if they persist. So as an instructor, it's very important to do these in check-ins with your students to understand what their experience of the learning is like, because if you're able to make adjustments along the way, that is motivating for the students to be able to see that they are seen, they are heard, that their feedback matters, and that they do have a sense of control and authority, at least to some degree, within their educational, within that educational setting. So if you can do that, it's a very positive thing to be able to do. And, the timing of that, if you're able to correct something quickly, that is also very much a motivator to keep your class with you. So thinking about things like engagement within your learning experiences, if you're an instructor, thinking about how you can engage your learners so that there are less lecture oriented sessions, even just being able to ask questions within a session, getting people to have pauses of reflections along the way so that they can think more deeply. If you quiz them or if you do checks for understanding, those are all very easy ways to incorporate techniques into your teaching to be able to keep your audience with you and keep them motivated. And we'll talk more in a second about failure experiences. So everyone has experiences with failure, at least to some degree, and failure can be one of those moments where people just stop and it's hard for them to be able to collect themselves again and to persist. So not all failures are created equal. Some of them hit harder than others. And we know that that can be something that drives people off their course. So it's important to think about failure as feedback, and whether that's you as an instructor or whether that's you as a learner, seeing that we can learn from our mistakes and taking a growth mindset can help us adjust our approach to work and form more targeted practice. We know that not all feedback is helpful. So when you're an instructor, really thinking about things that are constructive and actionable for your learners is important, because if there's nowhere to go with that critique, then it's just critique. And that doesn't allow a person to be able to grow, and instead is going to be much more of a negative emotional experience that they might internalize. And over time, if they see that they're not persisting the way that they would like to or reaching the goals that they would like to, then that can be highly demotivating, because they can internalize that as, rather than I had a failure, to being I am a failure. And so it's important. Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with the SMART goals framework for this, but each one of them is actually really important for that ability to reframe failure. Setting the right challenge is important so that you come in and you have a reasonable chance of being able to see persistence and success with the task that you're doing. You want it to be measurable as well, so that you know whether you have achieved that success or not, and how close you were to it as well. Because if you don't know how far that gap is, you don't necessarily have a way forward to be able to see how you can target your practice. So it should also be time-based and relevant, and these things all tie together and have ways to be able to help us with our motivations. So some strategies for boosting motivation, I've broken these down into those three components again of what motivation consists of. So it's important to set the right level of challenge, small steps, so you can see what your trajectory could look like and being able to assess it on an ongoing basis. Sometimes challenges are too big and you need to break them into smaller steps. Sometimes you need assistance with those steps as well, and it helps make more clear what you can do to be able to get through whatever that challenge is. The hardest part is often getting started. Probably we can all relate to that, where you have a to-do list, and as soon as you write out the to-do list, it's so much easier to check one thing off and then another than it is to think about, oh my goodness, I have all these things to do. Once you have even just that piece in front of you, it's so much easier to be able to go, what can I start with? So making the task clear and achievable, going back to those SMART goals, and some factors that influence the intensity also influence activation and persistence. These things are not mutually exclusive, but some that especially influence intensity are those pieces of the enjoyment and the engagement around them, feeling like you have some authority and ownership over the work that you're doing, some control. Those things make it more engaging, make it apparent how people can participate within the work that you're doing, and ideally make it community oriented as well. All of these things, if you can make it feel like appealing and valuable, will help create more appeal around getting through the obstacle. And then persistence as well, remembering why you started, thinking about that intrinsic motivation. Everybody within STEM came into it probably for some greater goal that is outside of themselves, like wanting to see some good and change happen within the world in a field that you enjoy and find like interesting and enriching to you. But often in those parts where like experiments are going wrong or you have a long way to go before something is completed, you might forget those things about why you got started in the first place. And those things can change along the way too. Like why you persist might be different from why you started, but asking yourself those things can help you kind of find that intrinsic motivation again. Reframing failure as feedback to guide effort and to like inform your practice is also important. And then rewards can help, especially in the beginning. So I have a reflection for us now, and we will take this, I think, at least in part online and in part in person here together. But thank you for listening to my quick run through of the presentation. And I hope you have found something that you can take away